Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a legendary campaign as Nakari in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Since Tides of Torment is going to include Slaanesh and a Slaanesh rework, I felt it was just worth it to revisit this campaign one last time and, well, go up against the golden trio of Utlhuan. I started by upgrading my initial barrack so I could get Forsaken of Slaanesh as quickly as possible, getting a grove building, and then going to war with Crix and then Kotik. Dealing with Crix's field army, the initial army you have to fight, pretty easy. Just seduced the Illyrian Reavers, did a bunch of flanking attacks, pretty easy win. The siege, however, that followed in Crix's capital was a bit different. I seduced 3 elven archers, but even with seducing 3 elven archers, increasing my combat power, especially giving myself range power, and reducing the enemy's range power, it was not going to be enough to win this battle on itself. And this is where you do get into one of the many problems that Slaanesh, and especially Nakari, do have. See, Slaanesh is really good in terms of field battles, because of the speed, the flanking capability, as well as various other things in terms of demoralizing the enemy and sniping enemy lords. You are going to be able to dominate a lot of those field battles relatively easy. But the problem is that on Legendary very hard, with AI stats modifier cranked up to the highest possible level, winning a siege battle, especially against High Elves, because of the layout of their settlements, because of their range power, and their spearmen, who are capable of holding the line quite effectively, you can end up losing very easily. Building siege equipment is not worth it, sending units on the walls is usually not worth it. It might work in some cases, but the starting units you have as Slaanesh, be it the Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh, or the Demonettes, are the kind of units you don't usually want to send on the wall on their own. The Devoted Marauders don't have durability and are not especially great line holders in that kind of situation. Demonettes are going to do better, at least from a damage perspective, but they are also going to suffer a very painful case of being banished back into the realms of chaos. And you don't want that to happen. Slaanesh has poor replenishment, limited recruitment slots, so what I ended up doing in this case was breaking down the gate to Nakari, using the elven archers I had seduced to kill off as many of the enemy range units as I could, and then sending Nakari to cap the victory point while my army was keeping the enemy army occupied. I didn't expect my army to win. It did eventually do so before I had won for the victory point, but it was a bit touch and go. This was, by the way, one of the few sieges in the entire game where I would be able to pull this off, because seducing costs money that I would not have going forward, given different priorities, recruitment priorities, construction priorities. I needed a big army. If I'm going to be dealing with the High Elves, the golden trio of the High Elves, Elfarian, Alariel, Tyrian, I need a lot of troops, as many as I can get, because they're going to recruit numerous stacks against me. And I need to also ensure those troops stay alive. So, welcome to the siege battle cheese that Slaanesh has to deal with. To be fair, the initial battle, bit annoying, to be sure. Some people summoned the cult on turn 1. I personally decided to use my initial devotees to get myself a recruitment benefit. Could have gone for the growth and control benefit to get my settlements to a higher level, but that would have cost money that I may not have. One of the things you do want to do as Slaanesh is to get to tier 3 as quickly as possible, because Forsaken, Devoted Marauders, and Demonettes are just not going to cut it. You want to get the heroes, you want to get Chaos Warriors of Slaanesh, you want to get a bunch of different units. Really, the winning proposition of a Slaaneshi campaign is to actually get to tier 4 as quickly as possible, so you can get Chaos Knights of Slaanesh with lances, because they have devastating flanker. Once I had taken Crix's capital, all that was left was to deal with their minor settlement. Recruited a second lord, soaked some archer fire with him, while Nakari positioned himself to just launch a devastating flank attack on the enemy as he arrived. Nakari is pretty good at sniping lords in a field battle. Pretty easy to lose Nakari though in an actual siege, especially against High Elves, in particular when you're dealing with higher level settlements. After this, after vassalizing Crix and getting a bunch of devotees so I could set up cults around the world, I recruited a bunch more units, got myself ready to recruit Forsaken, and declared war on Kotik. Set up a really nice ambush over there, seduced some Illyrian Reavers of Kotik, And then had Nakari show up, snipe the enemy lord, and neutralize their archers, because AI behavior with archers, at least on Legendary, is that they're going to try and keep them away from your flanking units. Spearmen won't be able to catch up with even your demonettes, let alone your actual cav units, or Nakari. And Chaos Lords of Slaanesh are fairly durable. Like, you can send a Chaos Lord of Slaanesh at full HP against an entire Elven army, or at least an early game army, provided they're not led by a legendary lord, and they will survive for a fairly decent amount of time. So, I ended up obliterating Katik's army, routing them, chasing them down, trying to get up as much post-battle loot as possible. This does make you realize how bad Slaanesh has it with replenishment, because you don't even get a good amount of replenishment by completely obliterating the enemy in a battle. That, of course, just because I dealt with Katik's army on the field didn't mean that I had dealt with Katik. Katik still had their 2 settlements, and that meant dealing with siege and also a proper minor settlement battle. And what I had used against Crix was not going to work against Katik. So instead, I decided to be a bit sneaky. I had reinforcements coming in, and I had positioned all my cav units, all my fast-moving units with those reinforcements. I deployed my army on one side of the settlement while awaiting the reinforcements to arrive on the opposite side, where I sent Nakari to break down the gate. Once the gate was broken in, my fast movers were in the settlement, especially given that the elves had to move across the entire map to get into position. It was just a matter of time until I was able to take them out. Flanking attacks, Nakari capping points, Nakari just charging units. I had also buffed up Nakari's charge bonus. This is something I usually don't do with Legendary Lords, but with Nakari, the charge benefit, Nakari is really the heart of the army for a Slaaneshi campaign. We'll see how the Kala ends up handling that situation. But Nakari can get a huge amount of charge damage, and so buffing that charge damage even further for skill line and focusing on combat skills for Nakari as opposed to army skills. Sure, I got campaign movement range, I got inspiring presence for experience per turn, but I did focus on Nakari's melee combat abilities. Maybe I should have focused on magic, I admit on that, but yeah, keeping the enemy army occupied while Nakari just dealt with isolated units, eventually triggering a balance of power victory because I had minimized my casualties. After that battle, Katik decided to attack one of my lords on the field with what remained of their army, but I had already moved my fast movers into position to preempt that. One of the things to mention about Slaanesh is your auto-resolve situation is really bad. You have one of the worst auto-resolves in the game. And AI will always try and attack you where you are most vulnerable, and since I was vulnerable, or they thought I was vulnerable, they ended up sending whatever remained of their army to try and kill my lord, and that didn't work out for them. Took some casualties, sure, but I ended up just outmaneuvering them, fast flanking units. Also, Utlhuan just filled with trees, and all that remained after that point was to just fight a minor settlement battle, which, again, just very tedious, not gonna lie. Very dangerous, too. You have a tendency in these kind of battles to want to just fast forward these things, but with Slaaneshi glass cannon armies, it is a risky proposition, because you can take a lot of damage, you can lose Nakari pretty quickly, so you actually have to fight these kind of battles slow, or normal speed anyway, find those flanks, keep the enemy occupied. I sent my Forsaken of Slaanesh over here to soak the damage, and this is why it's so important to have Forsaken of Slaanesh basically own Champions of Chaos if you're playing a Slaaneshi campaign, because you need those kind of units, even if you're going to recruit demonettes, which I did end up recruiting some demonettes, but even if you're going to recruit demonettes, you do want those Forsaken of Slaanesh, primarily because they're really, really good early game line holders. Chaos Warriors are better, but Forsaken of Slaanesh just have a good amount of durability, good amount of armor. They're able to soak a huge amount of melee damage and range damage, which is pretty important when you're up against Utlhuan. But dealing with Katik and then vassalizing Katik in their minor settlement while I kept their capital was the easy part of this campaign. I would eventually trade the capital, and when I spawned cults, well, one of the things I realized spawning cults and unlocking Nakari's special skill line in the process What I realized is Grom had not taken Bordelot, because I got the cult in Bordelot at this point in the campaign. I also got one in Bellicor starting province. I could have gone for Bellicor, vassalized him if I really wanted to, gotten a lot of money in the process. But I figured, you know what? I'm starting in Utlhuan, I'm going to stay in Utlhuan. I'm just going to take a bit of a trip to Bordelot so I can actually vassalize Grom. Because you see, Bordelot has a special harbor, so even though, again, Slaanesh doesn't have the best auto-resolve, I could auto-resolve this. What ends up happening here is that if there is a port settlement, there is a possibility for the AI to just waste its time trying to attack it, and then if there's a lord in that settlement, they'll run away because of the scripting behavior, so the AI just kind of gets stuck. That's what had happened in Grom. I saw it had happened for 2 turns. I used the cult to teleport Nakari over there, and by selling this element, I was able to vassalize Grom. And this vassalization was kind of the key point, really, because it allowed me to be safe, in the sense that the way the AI declares war on you is if it thinks it's weaker, if it thinks you're weaker than they are. If you're stronger than they won't attack you so much. But that calculation also includes vassals. And so by vassalizing Grom and his significant amount of faction power, I was able to secure myself from the triple alliance of Tyrion, Alarion, and Alfarian. It was still a bit sketchy to be sure. I did kind of expect that Alfarian would end up actually, or Alarion and Tyrion would end up declaring war on me as I had declared war on Alfarian, but it ended up not happening in this case. This, of course, left me in the situation of having to actually deal with Alfarian, which was easier said than done. Tor of Rest is a formidable defensive settlement. When you're playing an Alfarian campaign, you don't even consider the possibility that it might be attacked, because even if it is attacked by a powerful army, due to the layout of the settlement and only having a single gate, and any foe that might attack you not necessarily having siege, especially Slaanesh, it is pretty easy to actually defend. I got lucky in this case, or rather I was able to take abuse a certain mechanic that Slaanesh does have, or Nakari has. Nakari has a skill line, a special skill that allows him to cause rampage in units nearby. This also includes units behind gates, and what will happen is the AI units will rampage, or units will start rampaging, and then they'll open the gate for you, and you can just get Nakari in the settlement. By doing so, you're able to distract a portion of the enemy army, while the rest of my army in this case was just charging the walls directly. Having a distraction like that is so important because it really screws over the AI in terms of the behavior. Besides, Nakari can't climb up walls, so being able to get Nakari inside the settlement quickly is a pretty significant advantage. I did send my Forsaken against the Phoenix Guard, and Spearmen on the walls took a lot of damage for them, but that's just the nature of Tor of Res. I actually got pretty lucky in this case, in the sense that there had been an army under Alfarian over here in the settlement, and they moved out of the settlement to actually attack Katik, because being my vassal, I had dragged them into this war by declaring war on Alfarian. You can avoid this by declaring war through a separate faction. So let's say Alfarian is at war with the minor greenskin faction. You can go to those greenskins, like, you declare war on them for Alfarian initially, and you can get a peace agreement, and then declare war on Alfarian for them, get some money for that. I didn't do so, I just declared war on Alfarian straight up. His army left the settlement. That army would end up being something of a nuisance, because they would actually take Katik's provincial capital, and I would have to drive them out, because Crix and Katik apparently can't deal with a minor High Elven army. But I was able to put myself in a pretty good position by taking Alfarian's capital. Of course, what I had to deal with at this point is Alfarian himself. He tried moving closer to Nakari, and then once he saw what he was up against, he retreated. Problem is, he retreated in such a position that he got a bridge battle. A bridge battle when he has Lyrian Reavers, Archers, Spearmen, Ballista, Caval. It was a bit tricky. I almost lost Nakari in this situation, just zipping around the battlefield, soaking some damage, and then just launching a full frontal assault. As I said, Slaanesh is pretty good in field battles, so even when you're doing stupid shit like this, which, by the way, it is a bad tactic how I played this, you still end up winning. Took some casualties, to be sure. I think I lost some units over here, but overall, I was able to deal with Elfarian's principal army. The army that had left Torivres had actually conquered Katiq's capital by this point, and then they just marched south to try and stop me. Easily dealt with them with the Cult army, but that left me to deal with Katiq's force. And that was pretty much it for Elfarian. Sounds simple enough, doesn't it? In reality, this took several hours to pull off all of this process of Crix, Katiq, and Elfarian. There were also quite a few siege battles over here, especially like in southern Evres. But with Elfarian dealt with and subjugated, I sold the territory back to him, got a ton of money in the process, so my economy, which had been teetering on the brink up until that point, ended up in a much better position. Sold Torivres back to him, got almost 20k, or 14,000 gold actually. And by this point, I had already pushed to tier 3 in Tor Asher, which meant that I could now get Cast Warriors of Slaanesh, I could get Exalted Demonettes, and I could get some better cavalry, though I decided to not get that. When I took Torivres, I was able to recruit some cavalry because Torivres has a cavalry building inherently, so I was able to pick that up. I believe it was a tier 3 settlement. When I attacked it, it turned into a tier 2 settlement because I looted and occupied it. Had some annoying siege battles to deal with. Truth be told, the siege battles were the most difficult ones. And at this point, that's kind of where I ended for a moment. At this stage, really, you are in a fair... If you manage this, if you deal with Elfarian, you got 2 major factions as vassals, and you can have cults around the world, and you're starting to do the cult mechanic over and over again. You can go around the world or wherever you have cults. In this case, I actually got one on Emmerich. Yay, more high elves. Or you can just stay in Utlhuan and try and conquer Tyrion and Alariel, which would end up being trickier than dealing with Elfarian, because Elfarian, the most difficult thing about Elfarian surprisingly ended up being the Illyrian Reavers. So they're actually more accurate against Nakari than regular archers are. I wonder why exactly that's the case. You would not necessarily think that Illyrian Reavers would be the big problem for Nakari. Truth be told, like by this point, Elfarian also was able to defeat Grom in an odd-resolved battle, so Grom went over there to try and attack Elfarian, and it just ended up, oh great, give him experience and a griffin. You're very useful, Grom. Thank you. That very much appreciated. Yeah, vassals being vassals, what can you say? Questine signing out. And stay tuned for more, because the real fight of this campaign is about to begin, though it may not be so much of a fight as it is a slaughter, though if I'm looking at the amount of armies that Tyrion and Alariel has, that is going to be a bloodbath on multiple levels. Or maybe I get lucky and I am able to vassalize them for diplomacy. We'll find out.